Today's book, Post Office, by Charles Bukowski, written in 1971. And Bukowski actually worked in the post office. He worked there throughout the 1950s and 60s and spent most of his adult working life in the post office. So this is not some book by some academic who subbed at the post office for 6 months to write a book about it. This is a guy who was there for most of his adult life, who breathed it, who sweated it, who was covered in the grease of it, who was ground up in the gears of it. This is a story, and it would be hard to replicate the way Bukowski lays it out because he was there. It's what you would call a fictionalized memoir. The protagonist in the story is named Henry Chinaski. This is obviously Bukowski, and Bukowski draws on his experiences in the post office, and it creates an incredibly descriptive, witty, colorful story of his experiences. Question is, some people may ask, well, why should I care about some guy who worked in the post office or the post office itself? This is not a story about a CIA agent who was working in the Golden Triangle, James Bond type. This is not a guy who sailed across the South Pacific like in Kon-Tiki. This is not the Wolf of Wall Street with stories about strippers and hookers, suitcases full of money, piles of cocaine. This is the consummate story of the American working stiff, and Bukowski lays it out beautifully. It's deeper than that. It is, and this is something I think a lot of American working people can relate to. It is the story of a worker who has a very creative mind, an aware mind, an inquisitive mind, an intelligent mind, trapped in drudge work. And in his case, it's more blue collar, but people, even if you work in the white collar world of entering figures in a computer, working in a cubicle, whatever, we all could relate, or most of us can relate to that kind of drudge labor where you are in essence turned into a piece of machinery. And to an intelligent person like Henry Chinaski, the protagonist of the book, or in real life Bukowski, it's a painful experience because he recognizes this insanity of working day after day in this drudge work, knowing this job is sucking the life out of him, and aware of all the lunacy, of the stupidity of this from the big picture, that there's got to be a better way of doing things, and having the awareness to see all of it, but yet not knowing how to get out of it. And so he's trapped. And what do trapped people do who are in situations they can't get out of? They self-medicate. And so Henry Chinaski, the protagonist, is an alcoholic. He drinks heavily. Bukowski drank a lot. He was an alcoholic. All right, now let's get into the actual story. Spoiler alert, some things may get revealed. I wouldn't really worry about it too much. This is the kind of book that is supposed to be absorbed for the experiences. It's not there's no twists or turns that, really are going to affect anything. This is a guy telling you what his experiences in a very authentic and honest manner. This is real. And that's the difference between mediocre writing and great writing. And this is great writing. All right, so the story opens, Bukowski's talking to a drunk at a bar, Henry Chinaski, that's the fictional character, is talking to a drunk at a bar. It's approaching Christmas time, and the guy's saying, hey, why don't you work at the post office during the holiday season? They need extra guys to deal with all the Christmas cards, the packages. And so Bukowski signs up, and it's not a bad job. He does it, and it's relatively easy. So the next thought is, well, why don't I become a substitute mail carrier? He does this, initially not too bad, and then the job gets worse and worse. The book also gets into his personal life, his relationships with women primarily, his drinking, and his love of the horse races. He gambles a lot at the track, and sometimes he wins some money. At one point, he won enough money to take off for a few months, but he has to go back to the post office because it ran out. At the end of the story, he reveals he's a writer. Now, that's a little bit of jarring because that's how he escapes the post office at the end, but he never tells us he's a writer throughout most of the book. In his later novels and short stories, he does, he continues with the name Henry Chinaski in these fictionalized memoirs, but he includes his, the struggling writer component in his stories. All right, so I'll read you just a short clip. You can get a sense of the flow. This is when he's delivering mail. When he first starts, he's a substitute mail carrier. The route started at the station, the first of 12 swings. I stepped into a sheet of water and worked my way downhill. It was the poor part of town. Small houses and courts with mailboxes full of spiders, mailboxes hanging by one nail, old women inside rolling cigarettes and chewing tobacco and humming to their canaries and watching you, an idiot lost in the rain. When your shorts get wet, they slip down. Down, down they slip, down around the cheeks of your ass, a wet rim of a thing held up by the crotch of your pants. The rain ran the ink on some of the letters. A cigarette wouldn't stay lit. You had to keep reaching into the pouch for magazines. It was the first swing and I was already tired. My shoes were caked with mud and felt like boots. Every now and then I'd hit a slippery spot and almost go down. The door opened. An old woman asked, the question heard 100 times a day. Where's the regular man today? Lady, please, how would I know? How in the hell would I know? I'm here, and he's someplace else. All right, so, you get a little bit of the experience. He really, this goes on throughout the book. He's got a brilliant wit, stories full of irony and all kinds of beautiful descriptives. You really get the sense of what it's like to work in the post office, especially during that time period. All right, so the primary antagonist of this novel is the post office. And from this antagonist, a lot of the themes emerge. It's like a lake with a lot of eddies and rivers and streams that flow from it. Why is the post office is his antagonist? On many levels, on a very basic, literal level, the post office antagonizes him. Whether it's his postal coworkers, the customers on his route, the supervisors, and they play an important role because they represent the authoritarian figure. And authoritarianism is an important theme because the post office represents an authoritarian system. And these supervisors are always trying to make his life miserable all the supervisors, even if they start out good, turn into dickheads eventually. Some of you may recall the Stanford prison experiments. They made a movie about it. And what happened was they took a control group and they divided up into prisoners and guards in Stanford University. And the people who took on the guard roles became extremely sadistic. And that's what happens in an authoritarian system. That's what happens with these supervisors. And so important, and I think that's an important part of the theme. Also, bureaucracy. The bureaucracy that comes out of this post office is universal. It's unique to the post office. Bukowski represents this when he's called down to the main office to explain his actions because he's constantly getting written up. And also he gets all these letters, which Bukowski, I'm sorry, when I say Bukowski, I should say Chinaski. I'm using them interchangeably because, like I said, this is a fictionalized memoir. So Chinaski gets called down. We see the bureaucracy and his interaction with the management. But also he constantly gets letters from the post office, and you see the ridiculousness of the bureaucracy, the anti-human qualities of this bureaucracy. And it reminds me of Catch-22, or like Franz Kafka's The Trial. On a greater level, the post office represents the system in which we are all components of. It is the machine. It is the machine in which we are all cogs, whether we are the gears and cranks and screws of the more mechanical, dehumanized nature, or higher up. We all play our part in the machine, and it is very difficult to escape because this machine has almost gained a momentum of its own. This is the system we find ourselves in. And to keep the machine running, human beings have to be sacrificed, human potential, human creativity has to be suppressed in favor of keeping the system going. There has to be a better way, but this is the system, this is the machine, and so it goes, and that's the trade-off. The machine feeds on the human spirit. Likewise, the machine gives something in return. On a basic Maslow hierarchy of needs level, it's giving you the money you need to pay your bills for shelter, food, clothing, but you sacrifice your mind, body, soul. Another theme we see, and this is a universal theme throughout literature, life is a struggle, but if we persevere, if we stay true to ourselves, eventually we could reach some form of self-actualization, even if it's a self-realization of rising above, at least on a consciousness level. Through struggle, we gain a higher form of self-awareness, and we may actually become self-actualized and do what we're supposed to do, or what is more true to who we are as human beings. Bukowski accomplishes this at the end. He becomes a writer, and build off that the theme of things of real value, of transcendence, things that are external to the machine, require sacrifice. Bukowski sacrifices his body. The machine takes its toll on him. It destroys him. And through the course of the book, at some point, Chinaski becomes a letter sorter. So he transfers from delivering mail to actually sorting the mail, dropping it in the various slots based on the zip code. And he does this job is this, it's the same thing every day, the same arm movements, repetitive motion syndrome. It destroys him mentally, physically. And so in conclusion, Chinaski is the prototype of the American working stiff with a brain. And I've met I think all of us, we've been in this situation, and we've met so many gifted people who are stuck in work that is not optimizing them as human beings. And this is the story of work. How can we create systems that elevate people and put them more in touch with their purpose and help them self-actualize. Right now, even today, whether it was you go back to people picking, crops in the field under arduous conditions, and which still happens today, or, the white collar cubicle drudge work. It is American drudgery, work drudgery. And that is a unique story, but that story is going to change because we are entering the technological age. So where Chinaski represents the working stiff of the 50s, 60s, and that went on to the 70s, now we have the age of automation. This is the age of technology. So jobs, cashiers, gas attendants, are being they're being replaced by automation. Even the post office, where he was a letter sorter, that's been automated. Email has taken away a lot of the post office job. Eventually you'll have drones that carry all packages, self-driving cars. Most white collar office work can be done by computers. There was a software program that wrote legal contracts, and they pitted that against real attorneys who were experts in writing contracts. And the software program wrote better contracts than human attorneys. So at some point through technological evolution, assuming we don't blow ourselves up and end up, in some kind of Mad Max, Stone Age, radioactive world, if technology continues, you will have this technocracy of automation controlled by, a small group of technocrats, maybe managers, but a redundant workforce. And that is the question. What will be the next saga of the working stiff? And whatever happens, hopefully we will have a Charles Bukowski to write that saga and lay it out for us.